What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're looking at a truly insane game played between the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen, and Daniel Naroditsky, the speed demon himself, on the chess.com servers. This game was just played today on February 18th, 2025. It is a shocker. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Magnus opens 1e4, best by test, and Daniel does go 1c5, the Sicilian Defense. He's a big expert in the move 1c5, and let's see what Magnus has to offer here. Now, normally he goes knight f3 here, but instead, knight to e2 is the move, and I believe this is called the chameleon variation. Well, maybe the chameleon is knight c3 and then knight to e2. Maybe the accelerated chameleon. I mean, let me know below what this is called. I'm going to call the accelerated chameleon for now. All right, in the game, black goes knight c6, and of course, the idea of knight e2 is you retain the option of going d4, transposing to an open Sicilian, or you can go, say, knight c3, g3, bishop g2, and so on, playing in the spirit of the closed Sicilian. Now, in this game, Magnus does go d4, transposing back to the open Sicilian. Very interesting stuff. Black takes, white takes back, and now which line will black go for in this system? Daniel normally plays the Najdorf Sicilian. He's a big expert in the Najdorf after d6, knight f6, and a6, but here that is not possible, and what will he go for? In the game, he goes g6, the accelerated dragon variation. It's actually a very strong system for black, and it is thought to be at least a little bit better than the traditional dragon for black, and a lot of black players will go for this if white plays, for example, an early knight c3, not allowing the Maroczy Bind, but of course now c4 is possible. All right, white goes c4 in the game, getting the key Maroczy Bind structure with the pawns on c4 and e4. Now black goes bishop g7, a very typical response, and now the main line for white is simply bishop to e3, the idea being you develop your bishop, maybe go knight c3 later, queen d2, and so on. However, there is a drawback of that move. Black can go queen b6 immediately, putting pressure on the knight and the pawn on b2. Those lines are very, very complicated. Now, instead of that, in the game, white actually goes knight c2, dropping back with his knight and avoiding any sort of trades on the d4 square. Now, this is a very typical Magnus Carlsen move, trying to maintain as much tension in the position as possible and maintain as many pieces on the board as possible straight out of the opening. Now here, what are black's options? Well, in the game, he goes knight f6, intending a very fast short castles. That is a very typical idea in these lines, but I do want to point out, instead of that, the computer loves the idea of going d6, followed by a very fast bishop e6, exerting pressure on the pawn on c4. Instead, knight f6 played in the game, and now Magnus goes knight to c3, defending the pawn on the e4 square. And real fast, I do want to add the timers for this game. So now we have the timers in this blitz game. All right, now here, black does castles. Short castles played in the game. White goes bishop e2, and then black goes d6. So far, both sides absolutely blitzing out their moves in this game. Now, white castles as well, short castles. And here, black has actually a lot of different options, a lot of different plans he can choose from. For example, knight d7, intending a fast knight c5, and opening up the scope of this bishop is playable. Knight e8, also playable. You can go, say, a6 or a5, gaining space on the queen side. And beyond that, there are various queen moves you can also make. Now, in the game, instead of those, bishop e6 was played by Daniel. The idea being you exert pressure immediately on the pawn on c4. You set up ideas like rook to c8, again, increasing the pressure on the c-file. It's a very solid way to play as black. Now, white goes bishop e3, developing his bishop. Black goes rook c8, again, continuing his plan for this game. White goes rook to c1. And now here again, black has a wide variety of plans. He's achieved the first part of his plan, going bishop e6, opening up the square c8 for the rook on the a8 square. He's played bishop e6, rook to c8, and now what does he want to do? Well, again, there are a lot of ideas. Knight d7 or e8 are playable. Queen a5 is playable. a6 is playable. But instead, in the game, a5 was chosen. Now, this move is very thematic for the accelerated dragon. It's a very typical move black will play. The idea being you are clamping down on any sort of b4 advance, and you also give your knight access to that b4 square where it can jump to, as b4 is now defended by the pawn. However, according to the engine, in this position, this move a5 is actually a little bit inaccurate, and it will give white very good chances to fight for an opening advantage. Now, here, according to the engine, the strongest moves for white include f3, setting up the very strong light square pawn blockade on f3 and e4, and also simply knight to a3, eyeing the newly weakened b5 square with the knight, and also over defending the pawn on c4 with the knight on a3. Now, Instead of those, here Magnus Carlsen, he gets a little bit trigger happy and he expands very aggressively on the king side with the move f4, gaining as much space as humanly possible. Now this looks very ambitious, and it is, but it does have a drawback. It leaves that pawn on e4 a little bit vulnerable, and black may have various tactical ideas to try and exploit that. And here Daniel finds a very key idea in this position to do just that. And again, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for Daniel right here in this position. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this. All right, here Daniel finds the key move, knight to b4, jumping in with the knight. What is the idea? It's very simple. First of all, if you take the knight, black takes back, and you remove the defender of the pawn on e4. For example, if white goes knight takes b4, that is a massive mistake. Black takes back, attacking the knight on c3, and now black has the very, very strong attack on the pawn on e4, as once the knight moves, say to d5, black would take on the e4 square. So overall, knight takes b4 is not an option. You also can't go a3, as then again, black just takes on c2 and then takes on c4. That being the other idea, when you go knight b4, you open up the attack of the rook on c4, so that pawn on c4 is also hanging. Now, in the game, Magnus finds the only move you can play to maintain the advantage here. That is the move knight to a3, over defending the pawn on c4 with the knight. And of course, you don't take on b4, as then the knight on c3 would be hanging. All right, now Daniel, he has yet another insane tactical idea in this position. This one is a lot harder. Again, if you like, pause the video right now. Try to find this key idea. This didn't happen in the game, but real fast, I do want to show it. The key idea here for black is knight takes e4. The point being, if you take the knight, if you accept the knight sacrifice, and you should, black goes bishop takes b2, hitting the rook on c1 and the knight on c3. That didn't happen in the game. You can investigate that on your own if you want to. Instead, in the game, bishop d7 was chosen. Now, what is the idea behind this move? I think Daniel wants to reroute his bishop to c6, where it does exert some pressure on this long diagonal, and white is very likely to go bishop f3. Therefore, the bishop on c6 would be opposing the white bishop on the f3 square. And sure enough, that is what happens in the game. White goes bishop f3. That is the best placement for the bishop. White is ready for central play or even aggressive play on the king side with, say, g4 and h4 if he wants to later in the game. Now, black does go bishop c6, a solid move, a solid square for the bishop, and white goes queen d2. Also, the most logical square for that white queen. Now, here, Daniel, again, he's got to find another follow-up plan in this accelerated dragon position. In the game, he goes knight d7, retreating his knight and opening up the attack of the bishop on the knight on c3. That may be important later in the game for various tactical reasons. Now here, Magnus, how does he want to deal with this threat? Well, in the game, he goes rook fd1, but this turns out to be a little bit of a mistake. It's maybe even downright dubious. Instead, the move knight a to b5 was the right idea, jumping up with the knight, eyeing these weak dark squares in the black camp. Instead, rook fd1 played in the game. And what is the problem with this move? It's very simple. Here, black has the option of giving up the bishop for the knight, and that move is a little counterintuitive, a little bit shocking, but the computer shows it is by far the strongest move here for black. The point being, after bishop takes, if you take with the rook or the queen, then the pawn on a2 would hang. The only way to defend the pawn on a2 without the knight on c3 is to recapture with the b pawn, but that completely destroys your pawn structure on the queen side. Now, personally, I would never play that kind of move. That just looks too dangerous to me, and Daniel agrees. Instead, in the game, he goes for the counterattack on the king side with the very strong move f5, gaining space, threatening f takes e4, which would be a very strong idea for black. And now, what is white going to do about it? In the game, Magnus says, you know what? If I go e5 or e takes f5, black will have the option of bishop takes f3, damaging my pawn structure. Therefore, in the game, queen to e2 was chosen, defending the bishop on f3 in advance. Now, this move turns out to be actually very, very weak. Instead, the computer says you must go e5 here, gaining space in the center, to which black has the option of playing g5, and the whole board gets lit on fire instantly. Now, that didn't happen in the game. You can investigate it on your own if you want to. Instead, in the game, queen to e2 chosen by the GOAT, a decent idea, but it is a little bit slow. And here, Daniel is going to have a chance to slowly take over, maybe not even slowly, maybe quickly take over in this game. Here, he simply goes f takes takes e4. Of course, that was the idea, opening up the f file, exerting pressure on that weak pawn on f4 with the rook. And now what is Magnus going to do? Very importantly, if you take the pawn on e4 with the knight, you remove the defense of the pawn on a2. For example, knight takes e4 is met by knight takes a2. Instead, bishop takes e4 is simply met by bishop takes. And again, if knight takes, then knight takes, and black is doing great. Instead, in the game, bishop g4 was chosen. Now, the idea behind this move by Magnus, you are exerting pressure on that weak square e6, which would hit the king. However, here, Magnus, I think he missed the idea of the intermediate move by Daniel. That is the move knight d3, jumping in with the knight, pressuring the rook on c1, clogging up the open c file, and so on. And here, black is officially in the driver's seat in this game. There's simply no time for bishop e6. It's not a bad move, but it doesn't accomplish a whole lot, and black will follow up with the move knight c5 sooner or later, kicking back that weak bishop on e6. Instead, in the game, rook c2 was chosen. White opting to get his rook out of the attack of the knight on d3, a decent idea. Beyond that, if you go, say, knight takes e4, trying to remove the defense of the knight on d3, then black can simply take on f4 with his knight. For example, knight takes, then knight takes, and again, black is doing just fine. Instead, in the game, rook to c2 was chosen, jumping up with the rook, and now black takes on f4. Knight takes f4, and then we have bishop takes f4, and then finally, rook takes f4. And here, once again, Daniel is just in complete control of this game. His bishop's slicing down the board. His rook is very active on the f4 square. And beyond that, there are a lot of ways where the queen and the rook can also enter into the game very, very fast. And even the knight on d7 has access to e5 and c5, both very good squares. I mean, normally Magnus is the one where all of his pieces are on fantastic squares, but instead in this game, it is the opposite. Daniel is in complete control here. All right, Magnus, what should he be doing right here? The most obvious move is the check, bishop e6. Is that a good idea? Well, it's not bad. You can insert it. It just doesn't do a whole lot. Beyond that, king to h1 makes a lot of sense, as black does have the option of queen b6, gaining a tempo on the king on g1. So king h1 would be a very good prophylactic move. Now, instead of that, in the game, knight d5 was chosen, jumping up with the knight. And now, what is the problem with this move? Here, black, he simply takes on d5 with the bishop. Bishop takes d5, white takes back with the rook, rook takes d5, and here Daniel shows his key idea. It's a very simple tactical sequence. Again, if you like puzzles, try and find the key strategic idea for Daniel right here in this position. All right, the idea, you swing out with the queen, queen b6, hitting the king on g1 with tempo. You force king to c1. Of course, there are alternatives. For example, the computer says c5 is actually somehow playable here, but instead, king h1 played in the game. And now, with the d8 square cleared, with the queen no longer on d8, you swing your rook over to the f8 square. Daniel Naroditsky lining up all of his pieces with that square f2. Black is ready for some sort of rook f2 advance, maybe even rook f1, as obviously black is threatening rook f1, which would lead to a back rank mate in 2 moves. All right, here, Magnus, he knows that. He goes rook d1, getting his rook back to the first rank, defending the f1 square. But of course, you can't defend f2 and f1 in one go. And here, Daniel, he flies into the f2 square, rook to f2, played in the game. A very precise move. That one deserves an exclamation point. Now, where is the queen going to go? It has to move, or does it? The computer says, actually, the queen sacrifice, bishop takes d7, allowing rook takes, then rook takes is playable. But instead, in the game, queen e1, chosen by the goat. Now here, Daniel, he spots his opportunity to trade on c2. He takes that free rook, not the free rook, the available rook. White takes back. And then here, simply knight to c5, jumping in with the knight, defending the key pawn on e4, threatening knight d3 ideas. And of course, the pawn on b2 is still hanging. Black can always take that later if he wants to. Now Magnus, he tries to defend. Bishop e2 is the move, dropping back with the bishop. And now black simply takes on b2 immediately. Queen takes b2 is the move, gobbling up that free pawn. Now white goes knight to e3, transferring over the knight. And here, here, Daniel, he finds another very precise move. Bishop to c3, flying in with the bishop and driving back that queen. What is the idea? If you move the queen away from the defense of the bishop on e2, you lose the bishop. For example, queen g1 is simply met by queen takes e2, and black would be up way too much material. I mean, he's already up 1, 2, 3 pawns in the center of the board right here. You can't give up a piece as well to Daniel. So what is Magnus going to do? Again, if you like, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for Magnus right here in this position to at least keep the game going for now. And the key idea, you don't move the queen. Instead, you counterattack against the black queen with the move rook to b1, pressuring the queen on b2. Now, where is that queen going to go? It's not going anywhere. Daniel says, you know what? Now is a perfect time for that queen trade. We have bishop takes e1, rook takes b2, then bishop to c3, dropping back with the bishop and pressuring the rook on the b2 square. Now white goes rook c2, transferring over the rook, trying to defend it. Black goes bishop d4, pressuring the knight on e3, and also eyeing the very weak g1 square, setting up various back rank mating threats once again. Daniel is just running circles around Magnus in this game. All right, white goes knight d5, jumping up with the knight. Black goes e6, pressuring the knight once again and defending the pawn on e7. That pawn on e7, no longer on e7, now on e6. Where is the knight going to go? It goes to the c7 square, pressuring e6, but of course, that pawn is defended, and Daniel remains in complete control here. All right, rook f2 is the move by Daniel, flying down with the rook, pinning the bishop on e2 to the rook on the c2 square. Now white goes knight b5, dropping back with the knight. Magnus trying his best to hang on. He's pressuring the bishop on d4 as well as the pawn on d6. However, Daniel finds a very simple way to defend both. Bishop e5, everything is defended, and again, Daniel is in complete control, being up 3 pawns in the center of the board. White goes king g1. Now, this move here is possible only because the bishop is not on d4. If it was there, black simply goes rook takes e2 check, hitting the king with the bishop, and then takes on c2. However, with the bishop off this diagonal, this move is now possible. So, white pressuring the rook on f2. Black simply goes e3, defending the rook, not even bothering to move it. Now, white goes g3, trying to give his king some extra space on the king side. But here, Daniel makes the final move of the game, simply knight to e4, jumping in with the knight. And in this position, Magnus, with 1 minute and 6 seconds left on the clock, he simply resigns on the spot to Daniel Naroditsky. He's simply done. There's not much he can do. He's down 1, 2, 3 pawns. Black's pieces are all tremendously active. Black has way too many threats. And according to the computer, Black has a 6.64 pawns advantage in this position. That is a lot. Even Magnus cannot come back from that. And for that reason, in this position, Magnus resigns on the spot to Daniel Naroditsky. Wow, what a game between Magnus and the speed demon himself, Daniel Naroditsky, from this chess.com blitz game played on February 18th, 2025. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button for me and comment down below what you thought of this game. I mean, from the wacky opening with the move knight to e2, all the way to the crazy attacking chess and attacking ideas that Daniel displayed in this game. So comment down below, let me know your thoughts. And if you want to see more Magnus versus Daniel Naroditsky action, check out this video right here where I cover yet another one of their latest and greatest games, and I'll see you in the next video.